More than 100,000 American workers have recently lost their jobs. This job loss wasn't due to China, automation, or outsourcing. Instead, it was a consequence of a policy enacted in Washington. A 50% tariff on aluminum was mandated by Donald Trump on June 4th. He claimed it would serve as a protective measure for American industry. However, within weeks, it turned into a destructive force. Factories closed, contracts disappeared, and paychecks abruptly stopped. This isn't just a far-off headline. It relates directly to your mortgage, savings, and future. So why is this pro-American tariff causing division within the country? Let's clarify the situation. At the start of March 2025, the Trump administration made an unexpected yet strategic decision. They brought back tariffs on aluminum and steel from Canada, imposing a 25% duty under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. Just 3 months later, on June 4, 2025, the administration shocked everyone again by doubling these tariffs from 25% to 50%. Trump asserted that this measure was crucial for national security, reviving domestic smelting and curbing job loss to foreign companies. On his Truth Social account, he proclaimed, "I will never let American jobs be sold out to foreign interests. 50% tariff effective immediately." This wasn't the first time America had taken such a step. In 2018, Trump had similarly implemented tariffs under Section 232, citing national security as the reason. The outcomes were mixed. While some plants reopened, others later shut down because of increasing costs. The 2025 tariffs, however, were significantly more aggressive and introduced in a perilous economic context. According to Reuters, this new order was enacted under the same 232 mechanism with no expiration date, allowing it to remain indefinitely. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo issued a carefully worded response shortly after. She emphasized that while boosting domestic production is important, it is vital to ensure that such actions do not harm downstream industries or disrupt essential supply chains. Senate Finance Chair Ron Wyden echoed these concerns, fearing that increasing tariffs would exacerbate the already high costs faced by U.S. manufacturers. Lawmakers from Michigan, Ohio, and Texas expressed similar worries. These states are crucial to America's industrial economy. GOP Senator J.D. Vance, a long-standing Trump supporter, acknowledged in a private briefing the need to avoid damaging our own supply chains while aiming to protect them. The political strategy was evident. Trump was preparing for what his aides referred to as the second phase of his economic revival plan. This phase targeted Rust Belt states using a vigorous blend of trade protectionism and populist language. The 50% tariff acted more like a political tool than an actual economic strategy, appealing to media outlets. Yet, what went unnoticed in the headlines were the quiet alerts from industry leaders. Within 24 hours, the Aluminum Association, which represents both U.S. producers and users, issued a critical response. While they commended the aim to enhance domestic production, they warned that most aluminum jobs in the U.S. exist within midstream and downstream manufacturing, where increased costs can have dire consequences. They estimated that for every smelting job saved, up to 16 jobs in fabrication, transport, and assembly could be at risk. Manufacturers were not the only ones raising alarms. Home builders, auto suppliers, beer manufacturers, and aerospace companies expressed their concerns as well. The American Beverage Association cautioned that the price of aluminum cans might surge overnight resulting in increased costs for everyday items like beer, soda, and canned foods. The most revealing reaction came from Wall Street. After Trump's announcement, shares of aluminum-dependent companies like Ford, GM, Boeing, and Ball Corporation fell between 2% and 5%. Analysts from Bank of America deemed this tariff a short-term gain with long-term consequences. Beyond economic implications, the announcement disrupted relationships with U.S. allies. Canada, the EU, and South Korea, all long-standing trade partners, were left in disbelief by this escalation. The move rekindled old wounds from the 2018 trade wars, igniting discussions of WTO complaints and retaliatory tariffs in diplomatic circles. Yet Trump displayed no intention of backing down. In subsequent interviews, he reiterated his stance, claiming that the backlash validated his decision. "If they're screaming, that means we're doing something right," he told Newsmax. This sentiment sounded strong to his supporters, but mirrored a familiar pattern to policy experts, this time with higher stakes. For millions of American workers, particularly in the Midwest, it once again prompted the question, are we experiencing protection or self-inflicted harm? Consequences emerged quickly as industry reports began surfacing just weeks post-tariff. Alcoa, one of the largest aluminum manufacturers in the nation, warned that this policy could lead to a loss of 20,000 direct smelting jobs and 80,000 indirect jobs across transportation, maintenance, fabrication, and assembly, culminating in around 100,000 jobs lost in U.S.-linked sectors. This number aligned with concerns from independent analysts who foresaw trickle-down effects impacting supply chains and local communities. These statistics weren't mere figures. They represented your neighbor's paycheck, your local economy, and a community's sense of stability unraveling. Why the drastic job losses? The root lies in escalating input costs. By April 2025, industrial electricity prices had risen to an average of 8.21 cents per kilowatt hour in the US, up from 7.79 cents the previous year. While this might seem minimal, consider that aluminum smelting requires approximately 14,821 kilowatt hours per ton. Therefore, costs accumulate quickly. Meanwhile, hydroelectric suppliers in Quebec charge their industrial customers as low as 2.48 to 3.94 cents per kilowatt hour. This discrepancy offered Canada a formidable production advantage. This price gap made U.S. smelting not only costly, but nearly irrational, especially as aluminum premiums in the U.S. surged to record levels following the tariff. U.S. buyers witnessed a 12% increase in Midwest premiums, prompting domestic mills to vie against significantly cheaper Canadian imports. By implementing this tariff, supposed to safeguard American producers, it ironically led to increased prices for downstream manufacturers and consumers alike. What does this mean practically? Consider a local factory producing siding or cans facing a 12% hike in metal costs. They have two choices: absorb the cost or lay off workers to balance their budget. Unsurprisingly, layoffs surged. Entire shifts vanished in factories across the Rust Belt, as truck manufacturers, can producers, and aerospace suppliers scaled back. By March 2025, union leaders in Canada had begun reporting layoffs due to U.S. tariffs, indicating that repercussions were surfacing north of the border. This impact extended beyond labor markets, influencing energy markets as well. A decline in industrial electricity demand occurred as major consumers reduced operations, leading to idle capacity and rising costs per unit. Analysts at the U.S. Energy Information Administration noticed a decline in energy consumption and rising average costs per kilowatt-hour due to fixed grid expenses spread across less electricity use. Thus, soaring tariffs resulted in diminished output, which in turn triggered higher energy prices, creating a harmful cycle. Facing higher electricity costs than competitors is detrimental for energy-dependent sectors. Alcoa's CEO Bill Oppenheimer candidly stated, "You can't fire up a smelter on mere promises. You need cheap, stable power." He highlighted the faulty economics surrounding U.S. aluminum production. Most energy contracts in the U.S. are short-term and unstable, unlike Canada's long-term hydro agreements. Smelters require decades of predictable pricing to justify major investments, yet these agreements are largely absent in most U.S. states. Meanwhile, Canadian states boast contracts that secure rates around 2 to 4 cents per kilowatt-hour for over 20 years, providing Canadian smelters an advantage that U.S. producers can scarcely match. In contrast, industrial energy prices in U.S. states, where smelters once thrived, have risen above 10 cents per kilowatt-hour regionally. This leads to millions in additional operational costs for single plants, directly impacting profitability. As a result, several U.S. smelters reported a freeze on hiring and delayed expansion plans by late April. In Minnesota and Texas, planned smelter projects stalled even as global demand for low-carbon aluminum grew. Concurrently, downstream sectors struggled under increased costs. Metal-intensive industries in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania reported layoffs, cutbacks, and halted orders. Economists observing regional data highlighted a noticeable decline in manufacturing jobs consistent with the tariff timeline. The ramifications reached even deeper. Local tax revenues plummeted, consumer spending decreased, and community services began to tighten in small towns. A factory shutdown eliminates jobs and disrupts the surrounding ecosystem that supports schools, shops, and hospitals. Canada responded quickly to this sudden policy modification. On March 5th, they activated the World Trade Organization's dispute resolution mechanism. Ambassador Nadia Theodore stated, "The U.S. decision leaves us with no choice but to respond to protect Canadian interests." Weeks later, Canada formally lodged a WTO complaint known as DS-635, setting up for legal challenges. Meanwhile, Canadian exporters sought new markets. Economic strategists began diverting aluminum shipments away from the U.S., targeting emerging markets in Europe and Asia while pursuing trade agreements with Mexico and ASEAN members. As a result, Canada's export share to the U.S. dropped by 10 percentage points, reducing to just 68% of all exports from May 2024 to May 2025. This redirection signified a significant shift in global trade strategy. Prime Minister Mark Carney moved swiftly. In June, he warned that if negotiations did not occur, Canada would retaliate, including limiting U.S. firms from accessing federal contracts. These were not mere threats. Canada announced a $1 billion Canadian investment fund to bolster its steel and aluminum industries amid the American tariffs. Additionally, new Canadian tariffs targeted U.S. exports, aiming to create enough pressure for negotiations. Pressure from other global players mounted as well. Australia's Trade Minister Don Farrell publicly criticised the U.S. tariffs as detrimental and considered its own WTO action. Meanwhile, the European Union held back retaliation but remained ready. Japan and South Korea cautiously lobbied Washington to reconsider its stance as they prepared their own contingency measures. In Canada, industry associations and exporters warned that U.S. protectionism would backfire. They stressed that it would not only impact southern communities, but also disrupt North American supply chains. They pointed out a significant vulnerability in U.S. tariffs framed around national security, since Canadian producers benefited from access to clean hydroelectric energy, making Canadian metal substantially cheaper. The U.S. move severed Canadian suppliers' links while yielding no certainty of boosting U.S. production. U.S. producers remained unable to compete with Canada's pricing or production capacity. This disparity became evident on trading floors. Aluminum imports from the United Arab Emirates surged dramatically in early March, increasing to 68,560 metric tons, up from only 16,124 in March 2024. This spike in third-party imports illustrated U.S. buyers scrambling for supply as both countries navigated the fallout from tariffs. High tariffs did not safeguard American jobs as intended. Instead, they increased prices, triggered layoffs, and alienated allies like Canada. Experts argue that genuine change requires substantial investment, particularly in energy and infrastructure. Some propose reducing Canadian aluminum tariffs to 20%, while others suggest tax incentives for recycled or green aluminum. However, a more significant concern is whether America should continue to raise trade barriers or instead develop smarter energy incentives. Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Deep State to stay updated on what's ahead.